Hey guys, Loman02. Hopefully I'm not too rusty at this, so it's been a while since I've actually made a video. This is going to be a 100-card Singleton video for MTG, or Magic the Gathering is the game. I'm going to be playing 100 cards. This is a 4-color blood list. I have put multiple lists of this variety up for the 100-card format because I have not been playing MTGO or just MTG in general for about the last 3 months. I did want to find a game today, and I wanted to play a deck that I think, one is going to force me to get back into the groove of making good decisions, because the mana tends to be pretty tight, like on how you sequence your turns out. Fetching is generally kind of important, but at the same time I wanted to have fun, and this deck is not the most challenging to play. It does top deck pretty well, and it really it wins as a mid-range deck. It fights through with good value creatures and then gets 2-for-1s off its cards, and then eventually wins. I did want to test out 2 new cards, so I did modify my sideboard. This is probably a permanent change. So this Knight of Autumn, which is a new card from the newest set, replaced Reclamation Sage. I call it the Swiss Rec Sage because it just does more, but it's better in pretty much every conceivable way, with the exception of it's a little harder to cast. But this deck is greed. I mean, it's just pure greed, but it works. And you'll see how it works here in a second when we get to the gameplay. I also added Assassin's Trophy. I believe I took out Gaddock Teeg. Gaddock Teeg was always kind of speculative. I just put it in for like random combo matchups. When you put in Gaddock Teeg, one of the issues you run into with this deck is you have to take on a lot of your good value 4-drop Planeswalkers. Greenstone Zenith obviously dies, but you have quite a few Planeswalkers, in the 4 spot. I guess not a ton, but at least 4 cards, correction 5 cards, plus the Greenstone Zenith. It just kills. You have 6 dead draws if you play Gaddock Teeg, but the card is still quite good. So basically, mid-range value deck. Well, mid-range aggro value deck. It's more of an aggressive version of this style of deck, but it does have a good mid-range value package in it with the Planeswalkers, so that it can help win out against control if they do manage to blunt your initial aggro spearhead. Quick pause, guys, and we'll jump to the first game we'll be playing today. Alright guys, back at it. One thing I'll note before we jump into this, I didn't note during the deck tech, is there's not a lot of tutor effects other than fetch lands that are in this deck. So there are quite a few cards like Eldamri's Call, a Demonic Tutor, Tainted Pact. Which Tainted Pact is basically Demonic Tutor in this deck, with the exception if you can't need any other given card other than the one you're trying to find that's inside of your deck, because you may exile it. But that said, this is definitely more of a tempo-based deck, so you don't see a lot of those effects in here, and really you're trying to have board impact every turn. It'll come into play actually during this game, where you'll kind of see how the mana can kind of be tight in this. Now, looking at this hand, this is not like a mana tight hand. It looks like I have, a 3-drop that's uncastable, a Tarmogoyf that's going to be size tiny, and then 2 4-drops. But my 2 4-drops are pretty good. I don't know what I'm playing against when I'm playing Bandit Keith. My guess is generally he's going to be playing an aggressive deck, but I don't want to go in just assuming that and, mulligan into a hand that just smokes him or something like that. So I'm going to keep this hand because I think it's acceptable. I mean, I'm on the draw, so I can kind of get some more interaction or just some more efficient creatures. I've got a decent, comes into play tap land to play in the beginning and eventually become a threat. This hand's acceptable. It can cast most of its spells over time, with the exception of Liliana, which I believe you will see sits in our hand the entire game. So opponent plays out of Plains and does nothing. So my assumption is they're on White Weenie. I'm pretty happy to pick up the Zealous Persecution because they tend to have a lot of X1s. This, unfortunately, is not a card that dies to Zealous Persecution. I just go ahead and, for efficiency's sake, play out the Tarmogoyf, and the hope is here that I can draw another black-producing land. They play out Silverblade Paladin, which is a pretty huge time beating, and what I opt to do here is just cast the Maelstrom Pulse, stay back with the Goyf because I figure I'm on the defense here, and Silverblade Paladin is just not something that I want to leave on the board because the card can just kill you out of nowhere. I do play defensive, and they do have the answer to my Goyf, which is fine by me because they're still down a card, and I eventually could pop this clue. But one of the things you'll see about the mana is that it's exceedingly tight, and over the course of this game, I never find the opportunity to actually pop the clue. Now, this is an interesting turn. They played on a Morph. I'm pretty sure it's not Exalted Angel. And I'm pretty sure not a lot of folks played the 2-1 that can morph and destroy or exile target creature with power 4 or greater. So my assumption is it's probably a tapper, a card that taps. And I'm trying to remember the card's name. It's some old card that costs 2 white mana and is a 2/2, and for 1 white mana will tap a card. So I want to really pressure their Gideon. I don't want to leave Gideon on the board. Gideon's a 4-power attacker. He's indestructible. He can nerf my side of the board by making it me unable to attack, although at this point in time, with obviously the pretty large differential in life totals, I'm not really in an attacking move. What I'm really hoping to do is hang on as long as I can to get a Johnny down, to get some 2-for-1 value off of a Johnny, and then eventually hopefully get a blowout with Zealous Persecution, or otherwise. So, hanging back here, going to hope to block the morphed card with the Bloodbraid Elf, and continue to take some damage in the air. But things aren't horrible. Alright, we draw very well for the turn, hit like some prime removal, and get a good 2-for-1 off Arc Trail. Arc Trail is a pretty spectacular card in this format that really doesn't see any love in any other formats. I've always been very happy with the card, and basically any red deck, from red deck wins up to just big red decks, I'll run it because the upside of the card is just so high. We draw well again and draw a Siege Rhino. One of the themes you'll see in this deck, like I was kind of saying in the beginning, is that this deck does top deck well. So the White Weenie deck has kind of gone through it's the time in the game that the White Weenie deck is going to shine is it's come to an end. It's come and gone, and we pretty much turned the game. They were able to beat us down pretty heavily here. I think get us down to 5 or so, and with the Johnny and Siege Rhino off the top, we're able to really stop them. They do manage to Oblivion Ring our Siege Rhino. I think they're just joking around though. I mean, the only thing they could have actually gotten with the Oblivion Ring that would have made any sense is the Clue or the Kasali Pride Mage. I just zapped their critter for no reason. I could have zapped their face and then attack for lethal with 3 creatures. If they have removal, they're still dead, so there's nothing they can really do here to keep themselves from dying. But as you can see, we've had this Clue in play since the turn after we played Tarmogoyf, or the turn after the turn we played Tarmogoyf, and we never had the availability of 2 mana to actually pop the Clue, or I had a chance where it made sense to actually go after cards as opposed to just continue to attack their life total, because the time frame, it would have basically slowed us down by an entire turn to actually transition our game plan and gain control of the game. It just wasn't worth it. Over time, if we draw enough lands, it'll be worth it, because we can still continue to do effective plays that you pressure my opponent, but as you can see, the window in time is just very short, and we just didn't have a lot of time to do it. So definitely more of a tempo-based deck. Whether it's controlling in the early game, which keep in mind still has a lot of control, because it's when I say tempo, I mean impacting the board. And in the early game, in this matchup specifically, I'm looking to impact the board very rapidly, and then ideally around turn 3 to turn 4, start transitioning into my own offense, or my defense turns into an offense. And another theme you'll see is a lot of the creatures have pretty high toughness in this deck, with the exception of some, Bloodbraid Elf does not, but Bloodbraid Elf is so good, you play it pretty much regardless, but most of the creatures have pretty large booties in the deck. But that all said, let's jump to Game 2, and we'll wrap this one up. This will be a short video, as I did not intend on recording today, but I kind of felt, I guess just the desire to share this game, and, my happiness with being able to get back into the game after a long hiatus. Right back, guys. Alright, so obviously we were able to sideboard. We sideboarded in. We have 2 sideboard cards in our hand, Forked Bolt and Dark Blast. This hand's not bad. It has a pretty large mana progression with Lotus Cobra, which can either transition into a Tidehollow Sculler or a pretty large Green Sun Zenith. And Green Sun Zenith could go 2 ways. If my opponent has a slower draw, I could go for a Saskia and just try to win the game that way. Or, I can go get a utility creature, which I believe is what happens this game, or just, some big attacker. Just, depends on what we want to do. Or just a good blocker. Doran is a good option with Green Sun Zenith if they really get out ahead early, because so many of their creatures have low toughness, here, an X1. I play out the tapped land. I don't want to kill this thing right now. I lamented a little bit because Dark Blast would have been very effective at killing that. I also don't play out the Cobra here. What I want to do is kind of surprise my opponent. I lose out on 1 mana this way, but I kind of want to see how they developed. So I do draw an Elves for the turn, play out the fetch land, the same turn I play the Lotus Cobra, use it to cast out the Llanowar Elves, generate 2 more mana off of my Bayou, and fetch, and then get a Tidehollow Sculler to get a Journey to Nowhere out of their hand, leaving them with, I believe, 1 land and a Mardu War Reaper, and they drew Veteran Armor for the turn. So they have a lot of pump effects going on. I'm hoping to try to get favorable blocks with the Zealous Persecution. So I'm kind of forced into a weird situation where I have to tap the Llanowar Elves here to leave up Zealous Persecution on their turn, but I also want to find the Knight of Autumn, one of the cards that I brought in from the sideboard, and I think probably could be main in this deck, to knock out the Honor of the Peers. So we basically gave his creatures -1/-1, or took away a +1/+1, and here we give them -1/-1 and buff our creatures up, and we're able to pretty much knock out their board. They do get back the Journey to Nowhere here, which is a huge deal. Lotus Cobra is really, in this deck only great for like a turn, maybe two. Like when you play it, why it stays good after that one turn where it does big mana like you saw here, is just it gets a trade somewhere along the way. So it, like boost your mana by like 3 or 4 in one turn, and then like after that, after you kind of have your mana base developed, which at 5 mana we're set. It just trades off somewhere. And here, it did a good job. I mean, it traded off with the Journey to Nowhere. We find Scavenging Ooze. Make a little bit of a misplay here, my opponent does. They unmake it before combat. I probably wouldn't have attacked with Land of Were Elves if they had not unmade, or if they had not unmade my my ooze before combat. Because they did, I was like, I'll attack. I was leaving it up just to make sure there was like no like shenanigans where they could get something back from their graveyard. So 3-bit Inspector, pop, find the 2/2 First Strike Vigilance Kazandu Blademaster. We do have the Dark Blast, so I start attacking in. They do not block, aptly. They attack with their 2/2 First Striker. I don't block here. I can't block successfully with Knight of Autumn. And they go ahead and Fiend Hunter my my Elf, which is fine. I stay back. They play out the Tapper here, and I go ahead and zap this thing on end step. And I believe I opt not to get it back this turn. I play out the Queen Marchesa. Marchesa is just a beast. I actually make an heir here relatively soon. I haven't read Marchesa in a while. This card is just so dumb. I forgot it had the evergreen ability of Death Touch on it. So, I'm still sitting here. Dark Blast is earning its weight in gold. I actually Dark Blast one of their guys here, which is really stupid because they were all going to die anyways because they all blocked to kill my my Marchesa. And they go ahead and pack it in here. I mean, if they had not, I guess I could put the Gideon out and plus all my guys up, or do whatever I'm going to do. Not a very heavy Planeswalker game here for us, but two pretty interesting games. And I was kind of happy I got to get a game in today, my first day back to MTGO, and I actually got to test out this card, Knight of the Autumn, Knight of Autumn, but it pretty much. It did exactly what I figured it would do. Now, the one I haven't got tested out yet, I mean, this is the first game I played getting back to Moto after 3 months, is Assassin's Trophy. So I have a love-hate relationship with Path to Exile. There are times in the game where I just love it. It's the best thing to ever have. Because land doesn't matter. And there are times in the game, like the early and mid-game, where it's just horrendous to have to give them that land. In this matchup, it tends to be okay, because, I mean, they don't need that many lands to function. As you can see, they have 6 in play. They have 1 more than we do, which is horrible for them. And one of the ways we're able to kind of get away, why it looks like, we're getting a little luckier, is because we use a lot more fetch lands. We use, like, all the fetch lands in the game. So, you have to count a fetch land essentially as 2 lands. It's the land in play and the fetch land that you use. So while I'm playing 36 lands, so they're, like, probably 30 or 31, I tend to, my draw will tend to support me a little better as we go into the mid game and then transition into the late game. Plus, in the late game, if I can cast my cards tend to be singularly more powerful. If White Weenie does not get interrupted, in the early to mid game, they can definitely overwhelm you. But their individual card quality tends to be a little bit lower, although there tends to be a little more synergy between them. Like you'll see cards like, Veteran Armor, which is like not a high synergy, but if you're playing tons of creatures, it is synergistic. Honor the Pure, synergistic with playing a vast swath of creatures, out, on a curve, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's kind of how they're seeking to win. But, once they get beyond that timetable in the game and they haven't used a card like, Armageddon to generate a verisimilitude of the early game again, and it actually transitions to the actual long game or the late game, then this deck will tend to shine and beat them. And that's kind of, what I was trying to do is stall for time in both games and just kind of get to a point where we were both off the top of our decks, and my deck's just going to serve up better stuff, singularly because I have better cards in it. I do think both decks are great, though. I do think that my opponent in the first game, had they drawn 1 to 2 less lands in the early to mid game in their draw steps, they probably would have gotten us, but they were a little land heavy. And in this last game, they were again a little land heavy, but I do know from talking to them they kept I believe a 4 land hand with a 1, 2, 3 drop curve. So that's a thing. Anyways, guys, hope you enjoyed it. This is going to be a very short video of just some 100 card content. This is 4-color blood here, with very minor modifications, and I'll probably start relooking the deck. There's probably some more cards out there that I'm missing. I figure over a 3-month time frame. There's been a lot of cool and good stuff printed out there, and definitely was happy I got to play with Knight of Autumn, because I do think, looking through the spoiler list of all the cards, this card really excited me. I think it was dirt cheap. It was like 19 cents or something, but, I thought the card was awesome, and I think it is awesome. It's just a, very flexible, great mid-range card. So very, very fun. All right, guys, enjoy and take care now, and hopefully relatively soon I will, start looking to do some drafts and get a little more gameplay in the limited formats out there. And you guys all take care now and enjoy.